For another coffee chats with Economic Alliance Snohomish County. So welcome everyone. My name is Gary Clark, President CEO of Economic Alliance Snohomish County. And I just want to make sure that everyone has their coffee cups or whatever you like to drink in the morning. Everyone's queued up with those. I see a few. All right. Well, this morning, we have the distinct pleasure to welcome some very amazing folks. But before we do that, you know how it is. We have to have some housekeeping. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that you all engage and join us in conversation via chat. Make sure that you ask questions, and so we can have a live and robust conversation. And then additionally, add your organization to your name so that we know who you're with as you comment in the chat. Now, with that being said, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our speakers. And so first and foremost, we have James McCafferty, who is the Director of Western's Center for Economic and Business Research. We also have Hart Hodges, who is the Associate Professor at Western Washington University. And then we also have another Western Washington representative in Shanna Johnson. So I am not going to dive too deep into describing these wonderful folks. I'm going to throw it to the team. Take it away.
Great, thank you, Gary. So as you mentioned, I'm Shanna Johnson. I work at Western Washington University, and we so appreciate everyone joining us this morning. We have a lot of interesting research to share on the current labor market. I'm sure many of you have read a lot of interesting articles, but you might not have access to the most up-to-date research. So James and Hart are going to share that with you. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about some of Western's programming that might be of interest. So having that said, I will pass this over to James.
All right. Well, and Hart and I co-direct the center together. And so Hart's going to drive our talk today, and I'll just be the good interrupting co-host with him.
Well, and speaking of the interruptions, Katie and Gary both have sort of challenged us to get this audience involved. So hopefully we'll get a lot of questions in the chat, and we've got Shanna and Katie and other people monitoring the chat. I've got my monitors covered with slides, and hopefully you can see those right now. But challenge us. If we say something that's interesting or you want more information, you got to push us. Or if we say something that doesn't make sense, which does happen sometimes, challenge us. So we'll dive in. I think, our view, do you remember when the labor market made sense? I think Gary said labor markets of Christmas past or something to that effect. But I'm going to just jump in and get us going. But we do want some interruptions. I'm going to start with just an overview, very, very quick economic outlook. And that's really to provide context for our comments about the labor market. And as we dig deeper into what we're seeing, was it the extra unemployment benefits that's kept people out of the market? I don't know if you remember the Johnny Paycheck, to take this job and shove it was his famous song. So do workers have the money to be able to say that? My comment here about that awkward dance, employers and employees, we've all been walking into a doorway and somebody else is coming the other direction, and you move left, they move right, you move right, they move left, and you have there's a little bit of that going on in the labor market right now, and other things that we'll dig into. And again, we are serious about the Q&A. We want to be interrupted along the way. Don't wait until the end to say, oh, well, back on slide 4, you had such and such. Jump right in. So we're going to just show some numbers here from the Blue Chip Consensus forecast. In other words, that's a group of economists that quarterly provide forecasts for the U.S. economy. Measured by gross domestic product, this year they're calling for, as of last month, calling for 5.9% growth, which is a lot, even by historical standards, and then moderating into 2022. If we had more time, I would show how those forecasts have been changing, because in the spring, 6 months ago, everybody was calling for dramatic growth this year and noticeable slowing next year. Then we had the Delta variant and some other things, and people have said, oh, wait, we've also got supply chains, labor market issues. So we've really dialed back the forecast for this year and pushed more growth into next year.
And Hart, I'm seeing this morning that GDP, there's going to be some news coming out today that the forecast for GDP has been dropped a little bit more again, coming out of this last month. So we may see this number get pushed even further out.
Yeah, so it's, but that growth has unemployment falling back down to pre-pandemic levels about the end of this year, certainly by the end of next year. And James, does that mean coast is clear? If unemployment is back to pre-pandemic levels, does that mean the labor market is back where we want it and people are?
See, this is where I'd say, Hart, you're misleading these people with data. So we'll unpack unemployment here, because unemployment is not the math you think it is.
You can't lie with data. Inflation. Well,
which inflation would you like to look at, right?
Well, inflation is one of the topics that we're going to try to avoid, might not be able to completely avoid it, right? How transitory, what's causing it, and so on. James, your area, supply chains, what's happening at the various ports and why? And have you done your Christmas shopping, right? Because
mine is floating out near the San Juans right now, I think.
Upside down.
We'll just move along. If you're not paying attention to that news story, you go back later today and find that one.
Okay, so there's a variety of things that we're not going to cover today. Some of them we'll cover this Friday, James.
Yes, in fact, I will put this into chat right now. This Friday, we're hosting a 2-hour fun economics discussion. If you don't get quite enough today, I know you won't. We're actually diving into all of these things with a couple different panel discussions, and also doing a much broader discussion of forecasting. So I put that into the chat here, Western Insights. You can check that out and sign up if that's something that interests you, but it's this Friday at 9 o'clock.
Okay. So we're going to start by looking at employment and unemployment data and why it's such a mess, and why you don't want to look at just one metric like the unemployment rate, because that does not give a full picture. Easy enough, right? Fred, you'll see the Fred moniker on some of these slides. It's the Federal Reserve's economic database out of St. Louis. We can look at data that shows the red line unemployment rate, and we're drifting back down to where we were in 2016. And the number of people working, all employees, and you take out the agricultural work because it's so seasonal. Look, we got more people working. What's going on here? So
wait, we have more people working. Unemployment's almost back to where it was in 2016, and that wasn't so bad. And we're supposed to have around, if I remember my econ class as well, we're supposed to have around a 5% unemployment anyway, natural rate of unemployment, whatever. So you're telling me good times are here again?
Absolutely. Except, what do we have? How many million job openings do we have that people aren't filling?
I think it's 8 million.
And how many people looking for work that can't find it? And then other mixture of how
That's
many
around
people,
8 million too, I believe.
well, and how many people are not even in the labor force anymore? We've got to unpack that. So,
okay, we'll dig in.
all right. So you said there was such a thing as a natural rate of unemployment. That's pretty good, James. You paid attention in class. You're not going to be quizzed on this particular graphic. I'm just a reminder that we can think about the economy as how much we produce. We can think about it as terms of how much we earn. So we can think about it as output or income, and they have to be mirror images of each other, because what I produce generates my income, and what you spend, right? So they all map. So you expect a close relationship between GDP, how much we produce, employment, and income over time. And this graphic shows back in 2016 through 2017, how closely they were moving together. Now they're not moving exactly together, and we'll come back to that. But the pandemic hit, and we had unbelievable changes in income, record increases. Yes, the economy shut down. We still had record increases in income because of unemployment benefits, one-time payments, PPP money, and so on, stimulus money going in. So we had a drop in output, a dramatic increase in income, of course, and a dramatic decrease in employment. And I'm going to ask you to remember this slide, because some of the things we'll talk about are, why is GDP back to pre-pandemic levels before the jobs are back to pre-pandemic levels? That's actually happened. The first time we used the expression jobless recovery was following the dot-com bust. And start thinking about, oh, wait, companies are able to make what they were before with fewer workers. It's that old expression that a recession is a terrible thing to waste. This is a good time for us to implement
Productivity, efficiency. Oh yeah, these are all good words.
James, do you remember in 2008-9, we had somebody from Alaska Airlines on campus, and they said, we are really excited. Everybody's like, what? No one's talking about being excited about the economy. And they were saying, we have some wonderful new technologies to roll out. We're really excited about the future at Alaska Airlines. And that was back when you might see 4 or 5 kiosks when you check in, but they said, it's not just the self-check, it's baggage, it's everything. Well, that's their output, not so many workers, so on. Another reminder. So this shows where people are quitting. You know, it's a quit rate. When you read,
I love this chart because, you know, Washington State, people are not quitting at the same rates as, say, I don't know, those great states like Idaho.
well, and
Everyone's moving there.
that
anyway.
doesn't mean quit rates can be a good thing, right? People typically only quit their job when there's another job out there, or they've got, or I'll quit my job if I want to start a company. But we want to remind you that if you're looking at national data, you should say, okay, I wonder how it differs here. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does, and you just got to be thoughtful. With those reminders, let's get even more into the labor force.
Hart, when we talk the quit rate, does it include people who are retiring? Do you know? When the BLS uses the quit rate?
Depends on your age. So if I quit, I have to work with you. I'm thinking about it.
Smart.
If I quit and I'm 60, the statistics would think I'm still of normal working age, and they're going to have a hard time figuring out where to put me.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say it depends on the age. So when we talk, and we're gonna get into this when we talk about workforce participation rate too, that the worker age has a lot to do with this, and that's problematic in our society right now because we have people in their 40s hanging it up because, well, you know, they have enough money. They've worked in the circus, and they've got enough money coming out of Redmond, and they're good. And we have people in their 70s that are going back and finding a part-time job, and so it messes with the numbers a little bit.
Okay, so let's dig into labor force participation, because if we're going to understand employment and unemployment, we have to be clear about who's looking for work and who is supposed to be counted and how. Right. So we have a labor force, and that is the people of working age. So think basically college to retirement. But that group then has to participate. Some portion of that group participates in work.
And a lot of people won't, right? Because they are in college, or they're in training of some sort, or they've elected not to work.
Yeah, and if you're incarcerated, you don't count as part of the
right. So you're never going to have 100% or 85% or whatever on this.
No.
Exactly. All right.
And if I'm staying at home with my kids while my wife works, I'm part of the labor force. I'm eligible to work, but I'm not participating in the conventional economy.
Right.
So, all right. So we're looking at, share of U.S. adults. And again, that's not a retirement age, and it's not 16 and under, or less than 16. Yeah. So what, 62% of the population of adults is in the labor force? taking out military, taking out incarcerated, taking out blah, blah, blah. About 57% hold a job. And what this graphic is supposed to remind you is we used to have a difference between the percentage of the population that's in the labor force and the share of that that's holding a job used to be about 2% different. Now it's about 4%. So that's one of the things we have to unpack.
And this is different than, say, the unemployment rate, right? I mean, this is labor force participation. So that gap is not my unemployment rate that I might read about in the paper.
Well, but you're peeling back the layers of unemployment, because the difference between these two lines is a matter of unemployment.
Right.
But
so the question is that gap, then why is that gap so much larger?
why is the gap bigger? But wait a minute, why is the blue line lower now than it was before the recession?
So you're saying less people are in the labor force?
People have left the labor force.
Is that why we're having a hard time filling jobs?
Well, there are fewer people holding a job. And so, yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
All right. So labor force participation, and we're going to talk about differences by gender, differences by ethnic group, so on in just a second. So, but this is overall. So combining all women, all men, and oddly, we saw this long-standing decline, long downward trend in labor force participation, getting us down to about 63% of the adult population working.
I think the important thing here, Hart, is to point out that this stuff isn't new. That what we're experiencing now is not new. It's the put your hand in a pot of lukewarm water and heat it slowly kind of a thing. I mean, it's been building over time, these drops, and we've seen a lot of different metrics.
All right. So the way I would have explained that, and I like what yours is better, I would have said, if you think about the trend that from 2007 through 2018, it's a steady downward trend. We're not far off where that trend would say we were going to be, right?
Right.
Now, a slight disruption in 2020 with that massive drop with the economy closing. And then part of it we're talking about today is, why wasn't the bounce back big enough to get us where we were? And to some extent, you're saying, well, COVID exacerbated the trend that was happening prior, or magnified it, or whatever is the right word there.
I would say it's caused a lot of households to rethink their priorities. That's how I would phrase that from a macro sense.
We'll have to talk about that. I'm going to blame crypto, right? Because if I started investing in crypto, no, never mind. We'll come back to that. Let's look at this. What's going on that means the labor force, fewer adults are participating in the labor force. Why? Well, this is a busy slide. The part on the left says, and these are different recessions. Each of the bars are different recessions. And the blue bars going down say there's a bigger increase in unemployment for men. The red bars going up are the bigger increase in unemployment for women.
Now, Hart, I like to sometimes get on the equity bus and talk about how, anyone can do any kind of jobs, but that's not, when we look at the actual data of who holds what types of jobs in the US, there is not good gender equity. We have very certain gender biases within industries, right? So manufacturing jobs tend to be dominated by more men, and service jobs tend to be dominated by more women. Is that fair?
Manufacturing, finance, technology, information tend to be dominated by men. Then you've got food service, accommodations, hospitality, so on. Retail dominated by women. And there are also some racial or ethnic group, right? You see a lot of minorities in food service or hospitality.
That's a different show, folks. We won't dive any deeper than that, but there is a fascinating discussion to be had around the structuralism that exists around this particular data point. Keep going, Hart.
The point is that you can go back 40 years and every recession hit men harder, right? The economy is slowing. People say, oh, I'm not as optimistic. I'm not going to buy that car or that washing machine. So manufacturing slows. Welcome to Everett. Boeing slows down. this recession, and some people call it the she-cession, because it hit, oddly, it hit service sector jobs and the jobs dominated by women really hard. And women saw a much bigger increases in unemployment than men. And as we roll this forward and think about it I'm now moving to the right side of the slide, families started saying, whoa, wait a minute. Not only have I lost my job, but the kids are home doing school remotely. I can't afford childcare, all sorts of things. Parents, so it's true for both men and women, parents have opted out of the labor force much more than non-parents. And sadly, in some ways, but not surprising in others, this has hit women again harder than men. Women are not coming back. They're saying, I'm home with the kids. Maybe their spouse got a raise, or maybe they said, wow, this is better. I was basically paying all of my income to childcare. And we don't know how long this is going to last. So there's a childcare layer in this. There's also just a family household priority, and something we don't talk about very much. Maybe it's, I'm now taking care of aging parents. That old expression of the sandwich generation. I've got kids and parents to care for.
Childcare, we did a fascinating study this summer for Whatcom County. We did a supply and demand study. And so if you're looking to get an idea around childcare issues, I suggest you read it. And it's a very different approach to looking at the issue than most counties have done. But we found really interesting stories and gaps around childcare. And it's a problem nationally, is that some people would like to go back to work. They just can't find childcare. And so people are finding creative ways to do childcare as well.
So I'm going to go quickly over
So
this one.
The shape of this looks remarkably similar.
Yes, for sure. But it's an interesting question to ask. Was the period of 2015 to 2020 where labor force participation for women was picking back up? Because if you go way back in time, right, there's been a longstanding decline in labor force participation for men, but offset by increases in labor force participation by women all through the 70s, 80s, 90s, so on. So we don't know whether the decline we saw post-Great Recession was a blip and women were recovering and then got slammed with this recession. I guess what I'm saying is it's going to take us some time to know what the data are really telling us right now. But one thing we can say is the labor force participation for women has shown more negative effects than men. Both were slammed in 2020, both recovered a little bit, but the recovery has not been as strong for women, especially women parents. A little bit for men parents, but let's hold that thought and jump to household dynamics, because we were hinting at that, James, with childcare issues and so on. We showed a slide earlier about the dramatic increase in income, right? So here's a busy slide.
And Hart, we should say there's a little trickery with that, because when you read the statistic in the news, it says average household income. And every time we ever had a recession, average household income goes up, and it's math. So who loses their jobs in a recession? It's typically lower paid folks. Well, basic math, right? If we get rid of the lower paid people, average has to go up. And so there's a little bit of trickery when you read average household income. So this chart here is helping us unpack that a little bit, because this shows us that the median account balance, checking account balances, when we look at by household, by income level, the lower earners actually wound up with higher checking account balances.
On percentage basis. We're not saying that the lower earners got more money. Not true. Higher earners, don't get me started. Lower earners had bigger percentage increases in their checking account balances. Some of the stimulus money, some of the PPP money, some of the extra unemployment benefits, but also don't forget, I haven't had to pay my student loan for a year plus. So my checking account balance is going up, and it's a bigger percentage increase for those at the lower end of the spectrum, of the income spectrum.
It's all that fifth grade math with fractions that you all try to block out of your mind all the time. We talk a lot with our students about denominator issues when we do math, that the denominators become very important. And something to keep in mind as you're reading the daily news is just think really hard about the math that's behind some of those statistics, and it'll help you figure out what is really the more important thing to do there. And Melody makes a great comment about people change their spending behaviors as well, which made dramatic differences as well for some household budgets.
Well, it changes that, that ripples through the labor market, right? Because I'm not buying what I used to buy, I'm buying something new or in a different location. But this was my Johnny paycheck. If I have several months, 6-8 months of living expenses in my checking account, I can say, Gary, I'm sorry, I don't like working for you, dude. It's just not been all that fun. I'm going to take some time off. And so part of the Great Resignation, doesn't explain the Great Resignation and the quits, but it's part of the puzzle.
It would make me pause though before I jump into the next job, right? I mean, I might take an extra couple of weeks. I might take an extra month. I might decide to go pick up a little bit of skills training to get a better job. So
yeah, I mean, you can leave your food service job, spend however many months doing some EMT training.
Right.
You can also read where quits. If I quit a job and go get another job, it often results in higher wages. So if I have the money in the bank to really feel comfortable about that quit, I'm doing it, right? Because the odds are when I come back in, I'm going to be able to negotiate a higher salary. Pick your industry. People often move diagonally, if you will, up the chain by going from company 1 to company 2 to company 3. Those job switches matter. This job just shows what's happening with wages year over year for people that stay with their job versus those that switch. And there are times when switching is not a good idea, but in a growing economy, switching is often good. Another factor to ponder is mobility. This is a busy slide, so let me just give one little bit of background. We have this narrative in the US economy that we will go to where the best jobs are available. People went to Detroit in the before it was a Rust Belt.
It was shiny then.
They went for work. People moved to places in the Southeast when the textiles moved down there. People went to jobs. With tech, it's often a little different. My tech company is not anchored to the power source or the waterway. You're starting to see over the last few decades, jobs moved to where the people want to be. That's another rabbit hole we'll avoid going down. But the point is, mobility has been part of our economic fabric, and interstate and intercounty mobility has been declining for a long time. So part of the puzzle in the labor market right now is that there's a lot of job openings and there are a lot of people looking for work, but they aren't in the same location, and moving is harder.
Well, now, I've read the same article these folks have all read, that everyone's moving out of Seattle. They're all moving to Boise. They're all moving to, I don't know, wherever, right? Now, it's kind of fun to unpack that data, because what you'll find is about 84% of the people that moved out of the city of Seattle moved to exotic places like Linwood.
And the
Bothell,
percentage of
Woodinville.
the people moving out of Seattle isn't that big.
No, it really isn't. And people have been moving into Seattle from such expensive places as San Francisco, New York. We were in a call last week, Hart, where they talked about the retail vacancy rate in Seattle is what was it, like 4% or something. I'm probably wrong on that number, but it's close. Anything below a 10 is considered really good. And we were well below that for the Seattle metro area, which of course part of Snohomish County at least is in the important part. And then when you look at San Francisco, it's like 30.
Yeah.
San Francisco has really struggled. So we're seeing people move from San Francisco to Seattle. We're seeing people move from New York to Seattle. And of course, that spills out into Snohomish County, because mostly when we say Seattle, we really mean Snohomish County, King County, Pierce County, Kitsap County.
But this graph shows by age group. So we've got 5 age groups left to right, and then by income group in each case. If you just focus on the top line in each of the clumps, the dark blue line, it says that people in the lower quartile of income are typically more mobile. They move to get better jobs. Younger people, the left side of the overall graphic, tend to be more mobile than I just realized I'm older than anybody on this graphic. Oh, well. The young people have historically moved, but the downward slope in all of the lines is saying mobility, people are less likely to move now than they were a decade or 2 or 3 ago.
I think that's important, where all this is rooted in helping you think about labor force. And so as you're thinking about trying to fill positions, what does this tell you around where you need to look, right? Where should you be focusing your efforts? People aren't likely to relocate for a job.
And it gets back to, maybe I'm looking for a job, but my spouse isn't, so I can't just move. Or maybe I want to move, but I'm taking care of elderly parents, and so I can't move. It's not as simple as it was in 1950, but mobility matters. It's the same topic, different visual. So did you live in a different house a year ago? Way back, this goes back to we're still in the 1990s, 1980s. People used to move pretty darn frequently. And there's different ways of counting moving. Do I use your answers on the census and estimates in between? Do I look at your driver's license or so different sources of data, but you see the same pattern: declining mobility. And gosh, we can dig into this, right? What happens to housing markets if people don't move as frequently? Oh, wait, not as much inventory as I was expecting. We're not talking about housing, are we? Let's talk about sort of natural transitions.
So Hart, let me from the chat, let me throw a couple of things quick out. Do we have more recent data than this? No, there's pretty huge data lags. And one of the things that has really come to light for a lot of people out of COVID is there's a lot of lags in data. Most of the data we like to use has a 6 to 12 month lag in it. Every time you see COVID death information, there's a 6-week lag in that data stream. And so we've become very aware of how many days it takes to get data. And it's forced us to look at some much faster paced data set to understand kind of how things are going. So do we have more recent mobility data? Kinda. We can use post office data, and we do. But really we want census data because that's much better. And you
use data from U-Haul and moving companies. You might want to mention Track the Recovery because
tracktherecovery.org, great website.
In normal times, we look at spending data from Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis, and that's been worthless because, as James says, it's 6 to 12 months lagged, and the world has been changing faster than that. So the whole discipline of economics, and really marketing as well, is now looking at mobile phone data, credit card transactions, vehicle counts. And so we're looking at where are people moving to go shopping, and how much do we get a sense of how much they're spending from credit cards. And right now we're comparing that high frequency data to the old stodgy data to see how much we need to adjust things. We're trying to get more real-time data. It's a great question.
Yeah, the other point was, and again, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole, but housing affordability does get into migration patterns, but it always has. Housing has, one of the things Hart and I will talk a lot about in groups when we talk about housing affordability is housing has never been affordable for everyone. We've always had a percentage of people that can't afford housing. And so when we have honest conversations about housing, we have to have the conversation about let's define what housing is, and let's define who we're making sure we have housing for. And then let's talk about public policy. Because the market is not going to provide housing for everyone at a rate they can afford. The market won't work that way. That's just not how housing markets work. And so public policy has to layer on top of that. And so just we like to keep people honest and say housing has never been affordable for everyone.
Well, you can say it's not as if we had a housing market that was functioning for everybody, and then all of a sudden we walked up to this affordability cliff and go, oh no, and a policy change or a zoning change will fix it.
Right.
It's been either hidden problems or developing problems for a long time.
Right. And again, whole different show. We'll move on.
Different cup of coffee.
Yeah. Oh, or something.
Spike your coffee. All right, we're going to talk about natural transitions. Again, natural transitions in the labor market, not housing. We talked earlier, James, if I'm 55, 60, and I step out of the labor market, I quit. Because look what's happened to my 401k over the last however many years. Look what's, there's a wealth effect psychologically. I feel like I can retire. And you get a measurable, right now we have seen a measurable increase in people that have said they're retired. And we're having to adjust, this is survey data, but you're having to adjust what is labor force participation, because if I'm 63 and I say I'm done, some of the data is going to count me as part of the adult population that should be working still. But so this early retirement, if you will, that does seem to be happening, especially with baby boomers. But as you mentioned, even some younger people have said, wait, I invested in some rental properties, I'm done. Because to be counted as unemployed, I have to be part of the labor force and I have to be looking for work in a way that the employment security folks or whoever's keeping track finds me.
So that's different than labor force participation.
Oh yeah.
Those are very different numbers.
Labor force participation means I am available and well,
you're of age. You're of the age that you could be working.
You've got the I am of the age, and then am I willing and able to work? Am I looking for work? Am I working? Right? There's this spectrum, and if I'm working, I'm participating in the labor force. If I am not working but I'm looking for work, I'm participating in the labor force. If I have not looked for work or I have not received unemployment benefits and I have sort of dropped out, I am officially not participating in the labor force. Now we have a problem. Not only do we have these early retirees, but what if I am a gig worker and I don't have a boss, or I have some rental properties and I'm actually figured out I'm fine managing some Airbnbs and a couple of rental properties that I have. And I'm 50. No one knows that I'm working. Yeah, the IRS knows I got to pay income tax, but employment security doesn't know that I'm working because I'm not looking for work. I'm not filling out any want ads. I'm not talking to any employers, and I'm not accepting unemployment. So I've fallen out of the labor force.
So, okay, so let's talk about gig workers, and let's first of all, I hate the phrase because it gets so misused and maligned. So you have people that work for employers and you have people that work for their own companies, essentially, right, of some sort. And we'll just lump everything from an Uber driver to someone who does consulting work all in one category there. They're working for themselves. All right. The business formation statistics have been through the roof through the COVID experience. So we know that there's a lot of new business formations happening. We don't have data yet because of the data lags around what that really means. The Census Bureau is doing a really good job of putting together data on this topic, but there's not enough data yet to really know what that means, because business formations can also be, well, I have bought a rental house and I put that inside an LLC. It could be a family trust. It could be, I mean, there's lots of reasons why business formations happen. And so we're gonna have to wait and see if there really has been a huge growth in number of people that are really working for themselves from an income perspective. And so that's something we're gonna have to watch, but we're not gonna know for another 12 to 18 months, really, what that means.
I think there's some other things we're not going to know for a while. Work is always changing. The nature of work, how we work, is always a natural transition. There's always, a slow churn. And then we can look back and say, oh, that was sort of a structural shift, but it's that ability to look back. So thinking about how the workplace changes, this graphic shows the black line is how much stuff we're producing. It's a production index, and the blue line is a measure of payrolls. So think output, black line, people working, blue line.
Now, Henry Ford said that we should be paying these people enough to buy the stuff they're making. So is that true? Can they still buy the stuff they're making?
Oh, probably not.
Okay, just checking.
Well, at least half of the workers can't. So this is a really fun slide, and you could talk about it for a long time in terms of why this has been happening, why output, and notice that output is going to be income for somebody. So we can go off on this income inequality story, the 1%ers and blah, blah, blah. But we can also talk about globalization, efficiency. We've been able to increase our production without that many more workers. Now, especially 1980 through 2000, the black line kind of leveled off, and there was some concern from, what's happened. Why has productivity growth slowed? That's a different coffee chat. It's a big one. But this
Hart, there's a couple things I people are looking at this and they're asking good questions, which I always like when people really look at this and go, wait. First of all, this is normalized data. So we took both in the industrial production index, which you could look up anytime you want on Fred, and we set that to 0. So in 1970, that number became fixed. And then manufacturing payrolls, this is dollar amount of manufacturing payrolls.
I actually think it's employment count.
Okay, so a number of employees. So we've got the number of employees, again, normalized. So if we look at the number of employees normalized, you have fewer employees.
Well, and this is employees in manufacturing, not
correct,
not total.
Correct.
So
but the production index is nearly double what it was.
Yeah. So let's just roughly say 40 to 50%, 40% fewer manufacturing workers than in 1970, making 170% more stuff.
Right. And when we talk about manufacturing jobs, so, and again, if you're really esoteric on this, you can go, well, what? There's SOC codes, and that means that yes, there's crosswalks between industries, and so we're looking at a generalized crosswalk between the manufacturing NAICS codes and the occupational codes that typically go in connection with that. And so over time, things change, and so of course, all of this modeling has to adjust for those kinds of things. But that's how this works, because the jobs change. Jobs change over time, just like in 1970, we probably didn't have any buggy whip companies left then. But had we had buggy whip company in 1970, we wouldn't in 2020. We'd have someone else manufacturing something else. Michael, you point out to the very piece here that's the important part. This is a story about automation in a very real way, because the way you get fewer people to produce more is through automation.
Well, and I put at the top about self-checkouts at the grocery store just to get you thinking. That's not a good example because it doesn't really hang it on to manufacturing. I should have said, do you remember the King 5 story when the riveting machine was rolled out at Payne Field? And what did that mean for employment and productivity at Boeing.
It dropped the number of people that were riveting at Boeing because the machine did it.
So absolutely. Looking at the clock, James, how about if we throw out a couple of thoughts on forecasts? One, the wait for it, it's going to change. The money that flowed in the form of forgiven student loans, one-time stimulus, et cetera, it's not still flowing in. So some of the missing workers are going to be back.
Well, and
They'll have
people are going to
depleted their
finish their
savings.
training, right? They've gone to some kind of training. And it's interesting because community college enrollment around the country has dropped, which you normally do not see during a recession. University attendance has actually stabilized or increased slightly, depending on the campus you look at. It's also not typical that we would see that kind of patterns. But people are doing a lot of different types of training type programs that are out there, and they'll be back.
And it's going to, again, the take time part, it's not that everybody's going to go back to the job they were in. Far from it.
And, you know, and Western's doing things like I'll throw a plug in for the MBA program in Everett, right? I mean, that's a great way. The ROI for an MBA is typically less than 12 months. And so, you know, to go through an MBA program, being able to do it, you know, near close to home, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And just the psychological dimensions of COVID, and I'm stressed, and that awkward dance of, I don't want to commit to a job unless the employer can tell me how much I'm going to have to be in the office or how much I can work remotely and so on. And employers can't make that commitment yet because they haven't decided. So it was all this, it's going to work its way out.
What if my kid gets exposed to COVID at school and suddenly has to be home for 10 days? What if I have a friend of mine who has their kid was exposed at school and their wife was exposed at work. And so they have 2 different quarantines going on at their house at the same time. How do you explain that to an employer? How do you look for a job and have that? That's hard. Those are hard things to do.
You know, I think we've got a slide coming up. We'll dig into that a little bit, but we're sorting through. It's be interesting, you know, you think about I'm going to say downtown Seattle instead of somewhere in Snohomish, but people aren't going to go back in the same numbers to the food service jobs, but there also won't be the same number of food service jobs, because if you've got companies like Amazon letting a large portion of their workforce work remotely, there's not nearly as many restaurants needed in that particular area. So we get to work through this mess. It's going to take a little bit of time. So we were digging through some data for Snohomish County, looking at a 2-year forecast. And as you can, I'm going to insult you and read most of this. Employment growth just under 4% per year for the next 2 years. The good news, that's not a dramatically large number, but the good news is, because things have been going fine, better than lots of places in the COVID era. Now, curiously, in terms of the highest growth rates, low-paying jobs, food service. Was that, James?
Shocking. Well,
and
these are the jobs, but these are the jobs that had the biggest cuts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are the places, and these are the places that you're hearing the most stories about that cannot find workers.
And largest absolute demand in terms of just numbers of people, not percentages. Manufacturing, you know, that's a bit of a reversion to the mean. That's a more nuanced story, but again, accommodations in food service. And there's a good question that James and I were talking about before the start here. Will companies be able to attract large numbers back to low-paying jobs? And the highest paying jobs, utilities are always an outlier. Finance and insurance, information, very modest job growth rates. And that's true for all of the counties except Seattle, by the way, except King County.
And Hart, in our final minutes here, I want healthcare is not on this list. It's kind of in the middle, and healthcare is by itself its own conversation, because healthcare, the demand for healthcare is in the lower paying jobs. And so they're struggling. I mean, the average wage for home healthcare is below that of the entry-level wage in Amazon warehouse.
No,
And
it's
so,
skilled nursing facilities. You're actually looking for talented people, but your revenues are capped. Healthcare is a
yeah, it's that's a whole different conversation with much stronger beverages, because it's very complicated and it's hard.
Okay, so we'll wrap this up in two slides or so. So we haven't mentioned a few things like addiction. You can layer in the whole opioid epidemic and have a conversation about that. Poor job search skills. Some of that gap between so many people wanting a job and so many employers looking for employees is I don't know how to sell myself. I don't know how, professional and career readiness is lacking. And then on the other side, employers have had decades of being able to say, I have an opening and I want 27 years of experience for minimum wage. That's not where we are today, right? For the first time in a long time, employees have more, the workers have a little bit more say, and employers aren't very good at accommodating a flex schedule, aren't very good at thinking about, gosh, I don't want to just give you a permanent raise because that's going to ripple through my entire pay scale, but how do I do what you need? And it isn't all just money, right? A lot of the younger workers are saying, I don't want to just be bought. I want some other dimensions here. So in closing, I hope we've convinced you there's no single narrative. Here is why the workforce is a mess, or the labor force is a mess. Don't look at just unemployment or any single metric and say, oh, got it. And we're not going to restore the labor market to normal really quickly. Well, Gary may have a good idea, but I think it's just going to be hard, right? We've got to work through a lot of things. There's lots of dimensions where workers need help. You continue to help them, give them the assistance, build up their skill set, and so on. Help employers with how to look for workers, how to hire them, how to connect, and along those lines, James mentioned the Weekend MBA program. We're going to have a version of these slides available to Gary and Katie at the end of this. And so you do not need to scribble down these email addresses and notes. But learning more about professional and continuing ed opportunities, whether for yourself or for an organization or people MBA program with some changes, and then down at the very bottom, the Western Insights this Friday. This will all be sent out or available to you. And then James?
If you enjoyed all of this nonsense today, we post out a ton of things through our social media platforms every day. And so if you're looking to kind of find a filter for economic news that you think you want to make sure you stay up on stuff, it's a great way to do it. We also post stuff we don't agree with, and we'll tell you we don't agree with this. This is why. But that's a great way to kind of get a little economic fix sprinkled throughout your day. So we post about 6 or so things a day. So it's not totally overwhelming, but there's some good content there. And Shannon, we got 1 minute left, but you guys are doing a discussion thing about the MBA program coming up. I think that's this week or next week. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, we're holding an info session for the Weekend MBA program, but I just want to take this last minute just as a plug, because the slides that James and Hart have gone through, I think they've all given us a really good insight into what's going on in the economy and the labor force. And I think what we can take away from that is that not every worker's motivation is monetary based. There has to be other ways to get to compel workers to apply for positions in your company. And I think one way to really attract people is the idea of professional development and training opportunities, and Western can help provide those. So if you want, as an individual, if you want training opportunities, or even as an organization, Western can create bespoke training opportunities for you. And we also, as James mentioned, have a weekend MBA program designed for professionals, and it's right in your backyard at Everett University Center off of Broadway. So if you want to learn more about those opportunities, please feel free to reach out. Our contact information is included in the slide deck that will be shared with participants.
Gary, thanks for this opportunity today.
All right. Thank you all for that amazing presentation. You kept it lively and engaging and definitely full of information. So valuable opportunity for our participants today. And so I think we peaked at about 108. So thank you to Katie on our team for the help. And let's see here. We have more to talk about. So really quickly, just a brief update. You don't want to miss this event. This is a great opportunity to engage folks as far as what we just talked about developing workforce, finding workers, engaging with potential opportunities for business engagement. And this is happening on November 3rd, 8:30 to 11:30 a.m. It's virtual. You don't have to leave your sofa or your at-home office seat. You can have your bow tie on and some shorts and some nice comfy shoes, but this is the Business Resiliency Forum. And I want to say that our staff has done an amazing job of putting this together this year to make sure that it's a focus on the things that are needed from our business community. Again, this is going to focus on the attraction of talent, hiring in 2022, to cultivate a dynamic talent group for your business community. So again, please sign up if you haven't already, and we'll be back on November 9th to follow up with another coffee chats, and that will be State of the Schools. So please mark your calendars, go ahead and sign up and register. And this coffee chat, Katie will share this in our newsletter, I believe, and then also on our social media. So please, those of you who are with us, you know how we end these talks. Raise up your coffee cups, and just in case Katie is feeling froggy, she might even take a photo snap of us. So make sure you have your hair done right and all of that, and hold up your coffee cup in solidarity. Economic Alliance Snohomish County. We love the work that you all do. Thank you to Western Washington University for some amazing information. Have a great day, folks.